If you took the best parts of different Nintendo consoles to build one ultimate Nintendo system, what would it look like? Today, I'm going to answer that by going through 12 different categories, picking one winner for each until we have our ultimate console. Easy one to start, and I'm glad because it gets a lot more complicated from here. The Switch 2 is the most powerful console Nintendo has ever made, and there's not really any debate. For a portable system, the performance is actually pretty impressive. Aria Requiem and Indiana Jones and the Great Circle are both using DLSS to push visuals that do look really amazing for a handheld system. Yeah, this is one of the few categories where it is the objective right answer. When it comes to durability for systems, they could be hit or miss. The Nintendo Switch has had a lot of issues with stick drift. The hinges on DS's haven't always held up the best. The 3DS Circle Pad could wear down, but the Nintendo console that I think is the most durable is the Game Boy. You might even know the story about the Game Boy that survived a bombing in the Gulf War. The shell was melted, but it still booted up and played Tetris, and Nintendo actually kept this on display in their New York store, and I've actually seen it in person and it's actually really cool. The Game Boy was designed by Gunpei Yokoi, and he did a great job with it, even though it wasn't powerful, and the screen wasn't something to write home about even at the time. The thick plastic shell still holds up today. Like, you could probably drop this 50 stories and it would survive. The buttons have also held up surprisingly well, so for me, I think this is an easy choice. This one actually requires a lot of thinking because Nintendo has innovated a lot throughout their history. The DS launched in 2004 with a dual screen design and a touchscreen at a time when touchscreens really weren't common. The Wii in 2006 introduced motion controls and made gaming a lot more accessible and was an entirely new way to play. The Switch is also a big contender because it's a home console that converts to a handheld while playing console quality games, and it has pretty much changed the entire gaming industry. But I'm actually going to go with the NES here. And why? It's a pretty standard console, there's no gimmicks, there's nothing too crazy about it. It's because it innovated game consoles as we know it, before consoles were mainstream. There were gaming consoles that existed, there was the Atari, there was a few others, but the NES, especially once it had the Nintendo seal of quality, just had so many great games when before that, pretty much anything was being released on the Atari, and the quality was just all over the place. The NES was also a lot more mainstream. We also got the more traditional button layout here. Like, the gaming industry would look very different without the NES, so I think that's why I have to go with this as the most innovative. So quick note for this, I'm talking about developer support for the platform, not the actual third-party library on these systems. Modern Nintendo's relationship with third parties has just been all over the place. The Wii launched with EA and Ubisoft and Activision and a bunch of other companies that would support it, but most of them kind of gave up after the past couple years or were just making gimmicky games and not their big budget releases on the Wii. And it made sense because the Wii was far less powerful. Same thing for the Wii U. And then the Switch is interesting because it was less powerful than the PS4 and Xbox One, but it just sold ridiculously well and just had a concept that a lot of companies were really interested in, which was having their games on the go. So the Switch had a ton of third-party support. The issue is that after a couple years, it started to really fade. Like, it seems like most major third-party games releasing on PS4 and Xbox and PS5 and Xbox Series X just weren't making it to the Switch or got heavily downgraded versions, and that is something you have to put up with it being a handheld console. So for that reason, I'm actually going to go with the NES again. And the reason is that pretty much every company had to support Nintendo at the time if they wanted to make console games. The NES was the console, so they pretty much had all the third-party support they could have wanted. The SNES was similar, but the Sega Genesis was pretty popular, and Nintendo wanted to be more family-friendly, so that affected things. And then with the Nintendo 64, even though it was more powerful than the PlayStation, it lost a lot of support because of cartridges, and with the GameCube, it was similar where they had the smaller disc. So that's why I'm going with the NES here. Backwards compatibility was one I had to think a lot about, because there's been quite a few consoles with it. The Switch 2 with Switch backwards compatibility, the Wii U with Wii, the Wii with GameCube, at least the original Wii, the 3DS with DS, the DS with the Game Boy Advance, at least the original DS and not the DSi, the Game Boy Advance with Game Boy Color and Game Boy. I think there's a couple ways to look at it. Are we looking at backwards compatibility of what games it has? Because for the Wii, it has GameCube backwards compatibility, and GameCube has a lot of great games. But then with the Game Boy Advance, you get two consoles, and it's like kind of 1.5 because the Game Boy Color and Game Boy share a lot of the same games. I guess the way I'm looking at it, I'll go with the Game Boy Advance because it kind of has those two generations of backwards compatibility. But if you want to look at it the other way, there's a lot of good choices here. I have a feeling this is going to be controversial and someone's going to say I'm wrong, but there's no objective right answer for this. And again, it depends how you look at it. Nintendo has very rarely been willing to iterate on just what worked. Like, we have the NES to the SNES, and then we go from that to this, then from that to this, then from that to this, and then to the Wii U, which was just its own thing entirely. It's entirely subjective because everyone's going to have a controller they prefer. I'm sure there's someone commenting who would want the SNES controller back, someone who would prefer the N64 controller. Some people might like the Joy-Cons. But for me, I'm actually going to go with the Nintendo Switch 2 Pro controller. It just feels like the most premium controller Nintendo's ever made. You have all the buttons you need. including a couple extras. You have analog sticks that feel really good, bigger buttons. Like, this is honestly one of the greatest controllers ever made in my opinion. However, there is one big issue and one thing that brings it down for me. It's that it has digital triggers compared to analog triggers. So if we want to cheat a little bit, we can go with the Nintendo Switch 2 Pro controller with GameCube analog triggers. But if we can't cheat on this, I would just go with the Switch 2 Pro controller. Before I continue, I just want to say, if you're enjoying this, be sure to subscribe. Another very interesting category. The SNES looks great. The Wii U looks really clean. But I think I'm actually going to go with the 3DS. And it's going to win because it just has so many different designs. Like for me, I have the Red Smash 3DS. But there's like 50 different editions of the 3DS. There's so many. There's the 2DS, the 3DS, the new 3DS, the new 3DS XL, the 3DS XL. There's so many different designs, not just in terms of how the system itself is made, but just things like the interchangeable faceplates on the 3DS XL and all the special editions. I just think it's really cool. I really like the new 2DS XL model. It just has a very sleek look. I like the clamshell design. But then if we want to build this as an actual console, then it kind of limits us to home consoles. So with that in mind, to give a different answer, I do really like the GameCube. So by customization, I mean what you could actually do within the console. The Switch launched with almost no options and has barely added anything since. There's no theme shop, there's no badges. Your profile icon's basically it, and you get light or dark mode. The Wii U and Wii let you rearrange home screen icons. However, the 3DS gave you a lot. Not only can you move stuff around, but you could go to the theme shop and get a ton of different themes that not only look different to give your 3DS a design you like, but it would also play music. Then there were badges as well through Nintendo Badge Arcade, and it would let you use these badges to customize your home screen in whatever way you want. Like, I had way too many of them. And I think it's sad that we haven't gotten this kind of design in the Switch and Switch 2, because it was just a small thing that just added a lot of personality. Accessories, so I'm just gonna say it's the Wii here. So one of these accessories is the nunchuck, because a bunch of games needed it to have that analog stick. But that's the basic one, and not even really like an accessory because it's just an attachment to your controller that is pretty much mandatory as a Wii owner. But there are so many other things. There was the balance board, there was the Wii Wheeler, the Zapper, the classic controller if you want to count that. The seemingly infinite amount of attachments made for games. I know the Switch has a lot too, but I feel like the accessories now aren't as notable as the Wii. UI, which means user interface, which really hasn't been a big thing on home consoles since the Wii. You know, like with all the Wii channels and the music and all that. A small problem I have with the Switch is that, like with what I said in the customization category, is the Switch just doesn't really have anything that interesting. Literally, it's just your apps or your games, and that's it. It looks clean, but it's just very boring. I'm actually going to go with the Wii U here. It's kind of like a cleaner version of the Wii, where you have all the different channels, you have the Miiverse screen and everything. You would have the TV screen and the gamepad having basically different versions of the home screen. And I just thought it looked really nice. Like, it was kind of a mix of the clean modern design, but also having more personality. Now, I think Wii is also a really good pick here. I have a lot of nostalgia for that with the Wii channel and music. Both are honestly great picks here. So for online and social, I'm actually going to split this. So starting with online infrastructure, Nintendo's history pretty much starts with the DS in 2004 and Nintendo Wi-Fi connection. It worked, it was free. Mario Kart DS was like one of the few games people played using this. Metroid Prime Hunters was another one. It was very basic and primitive, but it did work. The Wii added Wii Connect 24, keeping the console online in a low power state for updates and the weather and news channel. Actual online gaming was a little better here, but not great yet. Then the 3DS improved things with more online-enabled games and a real digital storefront. And while the Wii and DSi had digital storefronts, they were for smaller titles and virtual console. The 3DS with the eShop actually had full retail games. Then the Wii U is when online started to feel actually somewhat normal, like the connection felt perfectly fine. A lot more games used it. There was minimal lag. However, it was still lacking things. Like, there was no real voice chat system. The only thing you had was that weird FaceTime thing on the Wii U, if you remember that. Then with the Switch, we got Switch Online shortly after launch, and it was a paid service. You had voice chat through a separate app for years, and I still don't understand why they did that. But then there was also classic game libraries outside of Virtual Console. Like, if you subscribed to Nintendo Switch Online, you would get access to these, and that was really cool. And then the Switch 2 pretty much was the same thing. Instead it added GameCube to NSO, and also finally added voice chat to the console, and you could also stream your game and use the camera. And I don't think many people are doing that, but obviously the Nintendo Switch 2 here is the answer. Now for social though, this is going to be different, and I'm not going with the Switch 2. So yes, it has voice chat and the sharing thing, but the online still isn't great. Like, you still can't message people. Can't really see much of friends' profiles outside of when you became friends with them in recent games. There's still friend codes for some reason when the Wii U literally had usernames. So I'm actually going to go with the 3DS here. So yes, it had friend codes, and there wasn't anything too crazy, but the social feature here was Street Pass. When your 3DS was in sleep mode and you walked past someone else with a 3DS in sleep mode, their me would go to your Street Pass Me Plaza and vice versa. And it was really cool. So I was in middle school when the 3DS was at its peak, and I would always just bring my 3DS and just see who I Street Passed with. And sometimes it would be friends friends sometimes would be random people, and this one feature alone is enough to give the 3DS the win here. So not counting backwards compatible libraries, Virtual Console, or Nintendo Switch Online, this is probably going to be the most controversial part, because it really just comes down to what library you like best, and everyone's going to think that their personal favorite is the right answer, and there is no right answer here. It just comes down to what you think, and since this is my video, I'm just going to say what I think. So starting with SNES, the SNES has a fantastic library, especially for being such an old console. There's so many classics on here that have aged so well, like Super Mario World, A Link to the Past, Super Metroid, Yoshi's Island, the Donkey Kong Country games, Chrono Trigger, Earthbound. There's just so many great games here. The Nintendo 64 has a lot of classics too, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Super Mario 64. The GameCube has a ton of great ones. The Wii U has games. Then you could even talk about some of the handheld consoles, like you can say the DS and 3DS have a lot of games. But just looking at everything, I think I have to go with the Switch. It's been out for 9 years now and is still getting games, and as far as I know, it has the biggest library of any Nintendo console. It has good third-party support, it has installments in pretty much every major Nintendo series, including a lot of great ones like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, 2 of my favorite Zelda games, Mario Odyssey, 1 of my favorite Mario games, the Paper Mario Thousand Year Door remake, the Super Mario RPG remake, Metroid Prime Remastered, Metroid Dread, and so many other ones. Now, if you're a Pokemon fan, this is absolutely not the choice, but just looking at it as a whole, looking at Nintendo's output on here and third-party support, which is taken into account here because I'm just talking about the entire library of this console. I'm going with the Switch, but I could definitely understand if you want to go GameCube or SNES or something else. So let's take a look at the ultimate Nintendo console. It has the power of the Switch 2, the durability of the Game Boy, the innovation of the NES, the third-party support of the NES, the backwards compatibility of the GBA, the Switch 2 Pro Controller as the main controller, the design of the 3DS, the customization of the 3DS, the accessories of the Wii, the UI of the Wii U, the online of the Switch 2 and the social of the 3DS, and the games of the Switch. So this is obviously something that's going to be very subjective. Literally, besides the power category, all of these are subjective, so there's not one right answer. And you don't have to agree with me, I want to hear your answers. Let me know what you think is the ultimate Nintendo console, and also be sure to subscribe and check out these videos.